So much of personal finance success is based on our money stories.
Our money stories are written by our background, our race, our creed, our gender, our sexual orientation, and all the things that have nothing to do with math and 100% with who we are.
On today's Career Money episode number 374, we're talking with Sunem and Israel Tovar of the Dream Teacher Project, who share their stories of being first-generation immigrants who overcame poverty, sexism, and racism, and still build wealth and are on a path to financial independence.
Let's get on with the show.
Welcome, Sunem and Israel, to the Career Money Podcast. We're looking forward to having you and having a great discussion.
We are so excited to be here. Thank you again for having us. We're really excited to have this conversation with you all.
Of course. Thank you. And thank you for reaching out. So what intrigued us about your story was that there's a couple of layers here. You're first generation immigrants. You grew up, as you told Business Insider and a couple of other publications, you grew up in poverty, dealt with systemic racism. Your dad helped raise, I think you have 8 siblings and he did that on $17,500 while your mother managed the home in LA. So, I mean, there's a lot of layers there. So what was life like growing up and how did that inform who you became in adulthood?
Yeah, so we're actually 6 siblings in total. So we're 6 kids. But my dad was the breadwinner, so he had to take care of my mom too. But yeah, so we grew up in Tijuana and then moved to LA, and then we eventually moved to Nashville. But when we were living in LA, we lived in really tight conditions. For example, when we moved to LA, we lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with 1 bathroom, and it was 8 of us. So you can imagine how chaotic it was to use the restroom.
We struggle with just the 2 of us.
Right. So imagine that, right?
Yeah. So it was 1 restroom. And so I know like all the boys shared like a room. So it was like 4 of them in 1 room. And our parents, they actually like slept in the living room, and me and my sister had our own room. But so then we moved to Nashville because our parents just couldn't afford to buy a house in LA. We lived in the projects when we moved to Pasadena. But something that I remember growing up was that our parents, they just barely finished elementary school. Like my mom, I think she went to 6th grade, but our dad, he only went to 5th grade. And I remember they telling us like, you should pursue higher education, go to school. We don't want you to grow up like us, having to work with our body. We want you to, get your bachelor's, do more education if you want, which is something that we kind of all got because 4 of us, like 4 of the siblings, we all have our masters. But we all went to college, but 4 of us got our masters because that was something that our dad really told us to do.
Yeah. So growing up in poverty led us to develop scarcity money mindsets. And for folks who don't know what a scarcity money mindset is essentially a relationship with money that is characterized as feeling like you don't have enough money, feeling anxious, stressed about money, feeling when you think about money, you like sometimes overspend, you oversave, you overinvest, and it can manifest in various ways. And obviously it's not specific to if you grew up in poverty that you'll develop a scarcity money mindset, but if you did grow up in that context, you're more prone to it, to developing like this mindset, and you exhibit those behaviors. And so we've actively had to work to improve our relationships with money. And we firmly believe that like improving our relationships with money should be a critical component of our wealth building process. And although we both were able to successfully pursue higher education and earn advanced degrees and earn middle-class salaries, we as first-gen professionals still didn't have any generational wealth, right? Like I always say this, I went to Yale and Stanford, and even though I was really lucky to get full scholarships to both places and go to these prestigious and receive world-class educations, like I still graduated with no generational wealth. So which led us to become committed to building some level of wealth as soon as possible.
Yeah. And that generational wealth seems to be a very important point for you specifically, Israel. I've read that in a couple of your publications and interviews. When you were growing up, what did generational wealth mean to you, and why was that so important?
Well, to be quite honest, I never really thought about generational wealth. I only began to think of generational wealth when I started to deepen my financial literacy. I had no concept of money other than what I saw my parents really struggle with money and sort of like that stress that came around with money. me thinking that like going to Yale and Stanford was going to like just inherently give me generational wealth, because you know those institutions tend to accept folks who come with that generational wealth.
Right.
And so it was like until I graduated and I started teaching full time that I was like, oh shit, like I actually have no money. And I was super lucky to have access to my sister, Sunem, who got her master's in finance, is a huge money nerd and expert, who was like, you need to build wealth. And this is how you're going to do it. Because if I didn't have access to her, I wouldn't be able to build the wealth that I have been able to on a teacher salary.
Right. Just a sidebar question here. Israel, you identify as a gay man, is that right?
Yeah, I
Right.
identify as gay, queer. Yep.
Okay. All right. So typically in our community, most of the time we don't find that that we are planning to have children. So I'm curious, why is generational wealth? Because we can't create generational wealth for ourselves, because generational wealth is wealth that is passed down. So why is it important to you, who may or may not have children? What's the importance or the value of it there for you? Because I think for folks of you who are listening, the reality is that a large percentage of the people who are listening to this podcast do not and will not have children. And so they may say to themselves, well, screw it, I don't need generational wealth. There's nobody coming after me. I don't have kids to pass things down to. Why is it important to you?
Oh, absolutely. That's such a great question. So as of today, I don't plan on having kids. But I do have nieces and nephews. And I think that for me, I think culturally, like we're very community oriented when it comes to like Latinos and Latina folks. And so for me, I know that I want to build generational wealth for my nieces and nephews, right? And generational wealth, we often say that it's beyond just the money component. It's like the habits, the knowledge, the healthy mindsets that we pass down to others. And unfortunately, because of broader systemic issues like racism, colonization, you know, I used to be a history teacher, so I used to talk about this all the time with my students. Like that's the reason why Black, Indigenous communities of color, we don't have generational wealth. And I think that like for us folks who are of color and we're able to access higher education and have access to higher paying jobs, is particularly important for us to build that generational wealth that our communities didn't have because of the legacies of colonization and modern day anti-Blackness and racism. And so for me, I see it as a personal mission to do that, for not only on the micro level for my immediate family, but also on a collective macro level for like Black, Indigenous communities of color, that we are constantly facing racism and anti-Blackness and all these issues that prevent us from building that wealth that our communities deserve.
Yeah, I love that you bring this point up, that it's not just about you and the money that you hand down. Because I think for most people, they think when they hear there's this idea of generational wealth, all they think about is, okay, when you die, somebody's going to get a whole bunch of money. Yay, who is that person? I want to be that person, right? But what you're saying is generational wealth is not just about the money. It's about the examples that can be shown to other people in our circle of influence, whether that's our family, could be brothers and sisters, could be nieces, nephews, could be cousins, could be other people who just see that. But I think more importantly, as you bring out, it's for the communities that we're in as well. And that, folks, this is why John and I really talk about this idea of financial well-being for queer people, is because many of us could just say, fuck it, I don't care. I'm just me. I don't need generational wealth, and I'm not going to pass this money on. But your group of friends see you, the people in the community around you see you. They're all people who may be looking to you to guide them in the direction of why should we build generational wealth for our communities. So thank you. I appreciate your saying that.
For sure. Another piece too is that, like, unfortunately, because we live in a capitalistic society, wealth, money translates into political power, social power, all sorts of power, right? And so as the queer and trans community, you know, we're historically marginalized, right? And so we need as much power as we can get in order for us to move in the right direction. And money, because of the economic model that we currently live under, money does give us that access.
It's like you've been listening to the Queer Money podcast for the last 5 years.
Yeah, maybe, right? Just maybe.
So Sunem, you are a critical component of this entire story of yours. What made you get into finance?
Okay, so So it started in 2015. So I graduated with a bachelor's in psychology. And then I realized like, oh, I can't make money with this degree, unfortunately. But then I graduated with student loans. And then once I graduated, like my family was like, oh, you graduated, you have some sort of income, you should get a brand new car. So I went ahead and got a brand new car. So like I graduated with a debt of $42,000. And during this time, I was only making like $20,000 because I had side hustles such as like web designing and stuff like that. And I realized that I didn't know how to manage my money. I would check my bank account and I would feel really overwhelmed and stressed because I'm like, I don't know if I have enough to pay my debt. And this is what made me realize like, oh, I need to learn more about this, which is where I started like consuming podcasts, reading many articles. I love to read, so I read so many blogs, so many articles. And then I was like, I want to go back to school and study finance because I really enjoy this topic. So I was like, okay, I'm going to get my master's in finance, thinking that this was going to help me learn how to invest and do all of this, but it didn't. They taught me like corporate finance, which is so different from personal finance. But during this time, like I had started learning how to invest and I really, really enjoyed it. It was like a hobby to me. So that's basically how it started. It just started because I wanted to become debt free. And then from there on, I just became really passionate about it and really passionate about teaching everybody, my family and friends. And most of them wouldn't listen to me, but it took them a few like months or years to finally listen, such as Israel.
We always share this funny story. Like we would, when I first started teaching, go on dinner dates every Friday to celebrate that we finished the work week. And then she would be like talking about how if you were to invest this $20 meal money into the stock market, your money will be growing and growing. And I just like didn't want to listen. I was like, oh, yeah, can I get another margarita instead? Because I do not want to listen to this. But we always highlight that your personal finance story is personal and that we always have like our journeys look very different. And I just wasn't ready in that part of my journey to listen to Sunem. But eventually, when I quit my job after 2 months and I had a mortgage and debt and all these things, like, okay, well, I'm finally going to listen to you and I'm going to stop ordering margaritas. I'm going to listen to you.
All right, no, so I have another question for Sunem, but my first question is for you, Israel. Have you stopped ordering margaritas? Like,
no,
not had a
I just
margarita
make
since?
sure that no, I love me some margaritas, happy hour.
We do too.
Happy hour. I just make sure I put it in the budget. Okay, I just put it in the budget and then we're good.
I love it. I love it. So I didn't know, Sunem, that you got a psychology degree first. So so this is very interesting because there's a whole subset in finance of
The psychology
of money. I just drew a blank. Yeah. All right. So are you, I guess, in the work that you're doing, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that shortly. We could probably go down a rabbit hole with this, but do you do a lot of behavioral finance and psychology of money at all?
So yeah, so we focus like kind of. So I always tell like our clients that I'm not a therapist because I didn't get a master's and like pursue all of that. But we always talk about how you manage your money is really psychological, like how you're feeling impacts the way you manage your money. So that's something that we do make sure to point out, like how emotions play into your relationship with money, the way you pay off debt, the way you spend. So yeah, that is something that we have talked about because of my psychology degree, which I honestly really enjoyed getting.
I bet. Have you had the chance to read on the psychology of money?
So kind of. I haven't finished it, but I did. I'm like halfway through it, and it's been really helpful. Like it teaches you so much about that.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and what I think David and I have been talking about this for years, that 80% of money is transactional. It works the same for everybody. $1 for me is the same as $1 for you. Can buy as many margaritas for me as can buy for you. All that. But 20% of finance is based on our background, our culture experience, our race, religion, creed, all that kind of stuff, all those different layers, our sexual orientation, gender identity. And that 20% has an exponential effect on the overall 100%, similar to the Pareto principle. So I think it's great that you're able to tap into that with your clients, because so much of finance is, everybody can look at the spreadsheet and be like, yeah, I probably should stop buying margaritas and put that $20 into the stock market and have much more money when when I retire. But
Mhm.
one, retirement is like 30, 50 years out. And two,
Mhm.
it doesn't address any of the psychological stuff. I mean, yeah, I get the math of it, but the psychology has a profound effect on all that.
Yeah, I want the drink right now.
So Israel, you're in teaching, and you guys have decided to dive into helping people in the teaching profession with their finance. Why did you think that was so critical for the people in your profession?
Yeah, so as we all know, unfortunately, teachers are severely underpaid and overworked,
I have
which
not heard that
shows
before.
no, breaking news,
Can you source this
everyone.
Right,
information?
Breaking news. There's a huge, severe teacher shortage because teachers are not getting paid enough and we're incredibly stressed and overworked. And that is exacerbated depending on your particular identity. So if you identify as a Black, Indigenous person of color, the system is actively pushing us out, and the data shows it, right? Like the data shows that very few teachers of color are in the profession, and we're the ones who are leaving the profession at higher rates, and that's for a myriad of factors that we can talk about for days, that research indicates and that my own personal experience corroborates. But because of this dynamic, Sunem and I decided to kind of like merge our expertise and our passions of like, Sunem is passionate about empowering women of color, and I'm passionate about empowering teachers of color, particularly queer and trans teachers of color, because of my identities as a openly queer teacher of color. And so because of this context and our passions, we're on a mission to advance and disseminate anti-racist, culture responsive financial literacy to as many teachers and women of color, with a focus on queer and trans teachers as well. Because we know that when we learn the language of money, when we learn how to make money work for us, we're able to leverage money as a tool so we can lead the lives that we deserve. And that, to me, is what justice looks like. When we, as queer people, as women, as Black, Indigenous people of color, when we have that agency and power to decide how we want to live our lives, I think that is what like justice looks like for me. And because we live in a capitalistic society, like money gives us that, and we want teachers in particular, because we're just like severely overworked and underpaid, to be able to live the lives that we deserve.
Yeah. So oftentimes on this show, we talk about how most Americans have a spending problem, not an income problem. This is definitely the one of those caveats to that, is that most teachers actually have an income problem and not necessarily a spending problem. So with that, like the very pragmatic question that I have for both of you is, I mean, looking at the numbers, is financial security accessible to most teachers?
Yeah, it definitely is. Of course, it's a little bit more challenging because, like you said, there is like a income problem. But yeah, they can definitely achieve financial independence or financial security. The only thing is like they will have to increase their income, and like Israel has been able to do it, and a lot of the clients that we work with, like they can do it by getting side hustles, such as like doing with the homework center, summer school, or even like pivoting to another profession, if that to get higher pay. But we have seen this happen with a lot of our clients that live in like the LA and New York City, where like, rent is really expensive. The cost of living is really expensive. They've been able to do that by like having side hustles. And we're all about balance. So we believe like, yes, there's a time where you should have a side hustle so that you can build your financial foundation. But once you have that, like you can quit them and like, just do what you want.
Got you. So then it sounds like then it's sort of an iterative step for you all, where you try to get them on what you define as a solid financial foundation. And then at that point, they can continue, whether or not they decide if they want to continue working those side hustles, or trying to generate that additional income. So how do you define what a solid financial foundation is? Is that the same for everybody? Is that different? What does that look like exactly?
Yeah, so it's different for everyone. So some people can be very conservative like me, and Ishara is not as conservative. But for me, like a financial security is like having an emergency fund fully funded, like having sinking funds fully funded. But like for other people, it could only be like having an emergency fund so that they're able to like feel financially at peace, because they know that if they have a layoff, like, or like, if like their partner gets laid off, they have that money. But yeah, it definitely looks different for everyone.
So how we work with our clients is that we have them do exercises in which they figure out what does financial foundation look like for them specifically. And so we never tell them what like this is what it should look like. It's like what, like going back to the psychology of money, it's really heavily dependent on, you know, each person's specific context and backgrounds and identities. And so once we have them figure out what does a solid financial foundation mean to you, then we help them get to that financial foundation.
I'm curious, how long is that process? Is that an easy step from A to B for a lot of people?
No, so I mean, so like I said, it's always going to be, it really depends. Some people, like, they don't have a lot of like, nobody depends on them. So for them to get to point A to point B, it's going to be way easier than someone who has like a family that they have to support. It's definitely going to take like longer for them, but it's definitely doable.
And we always highlight that like your personal finance journey is not linear. It's really dynamic, right? There's plot twists in your journeys, right? There's just so many things that can happen. And so like we always highlight to be gentle with yourself as you are progressing through your financial goals, as you are building that strong, solid financial foundation for yourself and for your family, because there's so many things that are out of our control. But we also highlight that we do have the power, the agency to be like, okay, there's a plot twist in our journey, but we can commit to deepening our financial literacy. We can commit to controlling the things that we do have in our nexus of control to ensure that we do reach that financial security that we want to have.
It's very similar to running a marathon, right? I mean, there are a lot of people who run the marathon because personally they want to run the marathon. They want to succeed and do it themselves. They don't expect to be the winner, right? They don't expect to compete with the Kenyans who just seem to win every year over and over and over again, right? They're doing it because it's what they want to do and achieve it for themselves. Maybe they have to stop along, run a minute or run a mile, walk a minute, run a mile, walk a minute. There's all different ways to get to the end, and we all have to accept the fact that our journey is going to be different than everyone's. What would you say for folks who are listening who get frustrated with the fact that they are not getting there fast enough? And fast enough, I put in quotes here, folks, because I think fast enough oftentimes is our own expectations of competing against everyone else, right? Rather than competing against ourselves. What would you say to folks who are in that feeling of, it's not happening fast enough for me? I want to get there, and I want to get there now.
So first of all, I would say it's not a sprint. It's a marathon, like you said. So like, you just want to be competing against yourself. Like, if I'm able to save $5 now and I'm able to save $10 the next week, then I'm already winning. So the thing is, like, not compare yourself to other people, which is, of course, harder said than done. But because even me being like, a financial expert, I'm still like, sometimes I still struggle with this. So like, basically it's to remind yourself, like, and like you said, like, be gentle with yourself. Know that you are just competing with yourself, and that you will get, everything happens slowly and slowly, because sometimes when we start off super fast, we're going to stop. Like, for example, I see a lot of people, they're like, oh, I want to start budgeting. So they create a budget and it's really restrictive. And then the next month, like, they fail at it. It's better to start slowly than to like start super quick.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that in addition to what you said, Sunem, like really gaining clarity on your why behind your financial goals. It's like, okay, this is my why. It's not Sunem's why. It's not David's why. It's my why, right? I think really has helped our clients like be gentle with themselves and like also continue on the path, right? And not compare themselves to although we're both guilty of it. We when I initially started like, oh, we need to invest as quickly as possible, which is why I was able to reach a 6-figure net worth on a teacher salary by the age of 26. But in hindsight, like, I feel like I deprived myself a lot. And I think that like it was an unhealthy process in multiple moments. And it wasn't until I left the classroom and I took I'm on sabbatical now from working full time that I realized how important working on your money mindset, your relationship with money is, because the more you work on your relationship with money, your money mindset, the more you're going to, and the more you go to therapy. So we're full, completely strong components of folks going to therapy. The more you do that, the more you realize that like money is not something to be accumulated, right? Like capitalism brainwashes us to believe that the one who accumulates the most money, the fastest wins.
Mhm.
That's not true, right? Money is a tool for you to leverage, like I said in the past, for you to live the best life, that whatever that means to you. So right now, for example, I'm not investing anything, right? I'm only spending actually. But I feel like the healthiest I've been when it comes to my money mindset, because I'm learning what brings me joy. I'm learning that like these parts of the world, just like I want to be in, like this is how I want to spend my morning. And like I feel like for folks who are listening, who have an issue or a challenge of like reaching their goals faster, it's like I feel like you should also focus on like your why, and focus on improving your relationship with money, and also focusing on like what brings you joy and how money can give you those things, and that's going to help you to slow down a little bit.
Right. And fortunately, you set up the foundation for you to be able to do this, right? You set up the foundation that's allowing you now to be able to say, okay, I'm going to take a sabbatical. I am going to just spend for right now. I'm not going to be investing. It's not a pathway to a financially free life, is to just do that all the time. You have to start with, you have to do the work first. Right?
Absolutely. And that's what we say, that there's seasons in our lives, right? And I was in a season that of hustle for those 4 or 5 years that I was building my foundation. And we also highlight that like, being first gen and being people of color, and me identify as queer and trans, like I had to build that financial foundation. Unfortunately, there's no other way for that hustle. And that's, systemic